in Spirit Plant Medicine World, Conscious Living Network, anybody out there on the World Wide Web watching this wherever you may be, whenever you may be, welcome. My name is Marc Caron. I'm here with our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference MC and co-planner and organizer, good friend, Stephen Gray. And I'm proud to have a conversation here with Chris Kilham. Chris Kilham has been dubbed the medicine hunter. He's an author, an educator, and a TV personality who promotes natural plant-based medicines, sustainable trade, and indigenous cultures. He's conducted ethnobotanical plant research in more than 45 countries and lectures worldwide about holistic wellness and botanical medicines. Chris helps to develop and popularize traditional medicinal plants, including ayahuasca, cannabis, San Pedro, kava, maca, rhodiola, ashwagandha. There's some interesting names in here. My pronunciation is a little off. Schizandra, tamanu oil, cat's claw, dragon's blood, and hundreds of others. The New York Times even called Chris part David Attenborough, part Indiana Jones. Welcome, Chris, to the program. It's always a pleasure to have you here as part of the conference. I know you're going to be speaking. I think this is your fourth year in a row, and we look forward to having you for your Sunday sermon series. That seems to be a new thing we're doing. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Marc. Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be on with you both. And yeah, both Zoe and I are looking forward very much to going back to spirit plant medicine and to, being in that whole crowd and just enjoying the scene that happens there and making contributions. And yes, I'll be giving the Sunday psychedelic sermon, so we expect people to be in the congregation bright and early.
I'll be browbeating them to make sure they get in there early. You can't miss Chris Kilham. Well, we're having a cannabis ceremony the night before again, right. And I'm going to make sure it doesn't go too late, and then I'm going to make sure that I harass them into making sure they come on Sunday morning too.
Well, yeah. maybe we'll have to have some sort of gimme for them.
What was that, Chris?
Last time, I think we did that at like 10 o'clock, and there's nobody who can't make it by 10. I mean, even the worst, hardest cases can drag themselves in by 10.
Well, some people want to go try this at home, they go home right. And have some more mushrooms at 11 or something like that.
Right.
So what have you been up to lately, Chris, that's relevant to the work of the conference?
Well, actually, I'm finishing a book right now called The Lotus and the Bud. And this is sort of right up your alley, Stephen, which is about the fusion of yoga and cannabis. And I've got about 3 more weeks to submit my manuscript. So I'm doing that. It'll be out next fall, InterTraditions, publisher you know very well. And so that's what I'm doing. And I basically, up until the past couple of months, was finishing up a 2-year-long ayahuasca vine sustainability project in the Amazon, which took 2 years and several trips there with, a team of people that I work with down there. And we just got all of those findings published in various ways. And I also presented that a couple of months back at the the World Ayahuasca Conference in Girona, Spain. So that's kind of been the biggest, expedition-related work that I've done in the past few months.
Can you give us some of the findings or information you've learned from that series of adventures?
Sure. Our work really focused on Loreto and Ucayali provinces in Peru, where there are lots of ayahuasca centers. And there have been persistent rumors that ayahuasca vine was very much endangered, that it was being ripped out of the forest and the forest was being destroyed, a lot of stuff. And I didn't buy it, actually, because over about 10, 12 years or so of going to a great many centers, they always had a supply. They always had a supply of chacruna, the leaf, as well. So basically, a team that I have down there and I did 4 different trips. One in the general Pucallpa area, one in the Iquitos area, and 2 out on a place called the Rio Tamaya, which is in southeastern Peru. And what we found was that there is a brisk trade in ayahuasca vine. There are many people now who are, in fact, cultivating vine, and that's a very good sign. They seem to be, it really seems to have dawned on people that cultivation is the way forward. And at the same time, we went to kind of the ayahuasca breadbasket of Peru on the Rio Tamaya, where most of the vine is coming out. And what we saw was a superabundance of vine and a supply that's holding steady for now. So I'm not sanguine about it. I'm not suggesting that people should just kind of like hang back and not worry about it. But right now the supply is plenty adequate. The sort of panicked declarations that people have made for years prove to be quite untrue. And there's a lot of cultivation going on because there's no question that, you know, ayahuasca is going to need loads and loads of cultivated vine in the future. So those are the findings.
Wow, that's fascinating. What about the, you know, you've been around a lot of the places where they're doing this. Did you garner a sense of the quality of the work itself? Because that's another issue we talk a lot about, as you know, in the psychedelic world, so to speak, is, you know, are there too many people that are just kind of having a, you know, they're either doing it for the wrong reasons because it's all about money, or, you know, even less savory concerns, or they go down, they're from up, you know, they're from the so-called first world countries, and they go down to Peru for 3 months and go with somebody who declares himself a shaman, and then he comes back and says, well, I'm ready to lead ceremonies now, and boy, I could make $250 a person per night, you know.
Well, you're going to have some of that. I mean, we've seen some of that, but mostly, you know, there were a few things that really surprised me. One was that, you know, I ask everybody the same questions over and over again. That's how I get themes of information. It just makes sense. And every single person that I asked readily told me what they pay for vine, or what they sell it for, or what their recipe was for making ayahuasca. Nobody withheld that information, nobody at all. And there was this remarkable openness. I think when you're down there, and if, for example, a lot of people cook ayahuasca and then sell it to various places. And you know, mostly these are sincere, hardworking people who do a good job. Maybe they're cooking it in big pots in their backyards, and it's not, you know, swanky or first rate. But at the end of the day, it's good ayahuasca, and you know, they're supporting their families and raising their kids, and you know, being decent folks. So basically, you know, this whole exploration, I mean, I would, of course, choose to take a project that actually has no possible end, but, you know, because this goes on and on. It's going to change over the years. But I see a lot of good people working in this scene, a lot of good people.
That's great. Really good.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear the positive, you know, take you're putting on all that.
Well,
Yeah.
especially with all the talk about sustainability, right? And it's great to hear that you've gone down. You spent a couple of years looking at it, and it's one thing Dennis McKenna said when we spoke with him last week too. It's like, you know, we have lots of coffee, we've got lots of cacao, we've got lots of those things, and it's about starting to now, you know, actually consciously grow it and farm it, really.
Sure.
And to do it, I like the idea of it being done, you know, properly in the Amazon with the people who are actually, you know, stewards of the medicine. So I think that's just fantastic news for sure.
Well, there's one shaman named Francisco Montes, about 14 or so kilometers out of Iquitos, and he has 6,000 vines.
Wow.
So he has so many ayahuasca vines, I'm not kidding. He makes fence railing out of them. He makes decorations for the buildings that he has for the people who stay at his place. And I mean, he probably has more vine than anybody else on earth, you know. But another shaman we know is planting 3,000 vines.
Wow.
Somebody else down the Tamaya has 2,500 vines.
How interesting.
I've seen villages over the years, because I didn't just start investigating this 2 years ago, but I've shown up at different villages where there would just be a tremendous amount of vine, and I'd ask why, and they'd say, well, it's becoming popular, and we'll let it grow, and then we can start to sell some. So people are turned on to this.
Hmm. Well, that seems to be the nature of humans. Whenever there's, an opportunity to make a living doing something, then, everybody's switching over to cannabis. Apparently, the forestry industry in British Columbia, they're encouraging people to, get involved with the cannabis industry now because the forestry industry is going down,
Right.
in terms of employment. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just sort of a more detailed question, I suppose. You often hear about some of the ayahuasqueros putting other plants, admixture plants, in with
Sure.
them. Do you know anything much about that? And do you have any concerns about that? Or are there?
I know a lot about it.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know. Can you see behind me? Can you see what's behind me?
Sort of. We see some plants.
That is a Brugmansia plant growing in our kitchen, and it just bloomed a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Brugmansia, or Toei, which contains tropane alkaloids. Yeah, I've seen. The most elaborate ayahuasca making I've seen in terms of number of plants is Don Alberto Davila at Blue Morpho, and he uses 12 plants.
Wow.
So he has sanango, he's got a little bit of toei, he's got some tobacco, he has tree barks of various kinds, in addition to the chacruna and the ayahuasca vine. And his ayahuasca is, as Adam Ellenboss described it, it's sparkling. It's quite remarkable. I know a guy, Guillermo, I think his last name is Alvarez, and
Alvarado. Guillermo is well known for some dubious reasons up here.
Not Arevalo. No,
Oh, a different one.
I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody else entirely, who makes ayahuasca with a little bit of toei, some tobacco, coca leaf. Coca leaf is a very common additive to.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and I think it's more for the spirit, because people never put in an amount that would have any sort of significant pharmacological activity, in a big pot. So yes, you do see it. The adding of a little bit of tobacco is really an acknowledgement, of the tobacco spirit, rather than something that's going to have an especially psychoactive effect.
Interesting. Well, now that people are getting our people anyway are getting fairly familiar with you and your work, I wonder if you can tell me to piss off if you don't like this question, but I want to I want to ask you more of a personal question, like where, can you say anything? Are you willing to say anything about your journey personally? Your spiritual growth journey with these medicines. Do you still take them fairly often, or you still feel like they're teaching you important things at this stage of your life?
Well, I employ cannabis quite regularly, and I have for a long time. And I also maintain about a 2-hour daily yoga practice. So I've had a lot of opportunity to really work with the fusion of those things. In terms of ayahuasca, I laid it down pretty hot and heavy for about 10, 11 years. And I've eased off a bit, haven't been down there in a few months. We'll probably go down in a couple of months and do some further ceremonies. But for me, initially the ayahuasca helped with some long-standing trauma. And over time, also infusing me with tremendous inspiration and, that great sense of interconnectedness that happens with these amazing medicines. And so in a way, when I go to drink, it's much more, I'm having a kind of a classic psychedelic experience that is by its nature revitalizing and cleansing. And I don't have the same visuals that I used to have. I've heard a lot of people say, it used to be this Mardi Gras of visuals, and now that's not so common. So
Yeah.
things have changed over time.
Yeah. I have a friend who's an ayahuasquera who says that the visuals are sort of like 101 level, you know, that she claims to have contacted a variety of, you know, sort of a hierarchy of more and more powerful spirits that are in behind that kind of almost veil of you know, visual material. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got a couple of questions for you, Chris. You've talked about using cannabis in yoga, and it's a big part of your daily 2-hour yoga practice. So daily, I acknowledge that and the discipline and your commitment to that. How do you find cannabis actually enhances your yoga practice?
Well, you know, one of the things that doesn't really get talked about much, but I'm describing it in The Lotus and the Bud, is the whole fusion between the nervous system and the endocannabinoid system. You know, I mean, we're familiar with what the nervous system is. A lot of people at this point in time may be less familiar with the endocannabinoid system, a group of receptors throughout our entire bodies, and for that matter, distributed throughout the entire mammalian kingdom, that receive cannabinoids that are manufactured within our bodies, but also receive very well the cannabinoids from cannabis itself. And the ECS, that is the endocannabinoid system, has its greatest concentration of any place in the brain. And so the fusion of that system with the nervous system, yoga being primarily a practice of the nervous system in terms of physicality, that is this sort of mutually enhancing, amplifying, energizing synergy. And so for me, you know, I sort of like the expression, the deeper you go, the lighter you get. You know, as you go into sensation, as you go into the nervous system, as the expansive capacity of the cannabis opens up portals in wonderful, friendly, familiar ways, and you go deeper into the nervous system, you go deeper into the energy, which is basically throbbing from every molecule in our being. I mean, we have about 14 million volts worth of electrical charge in our body's cells at any one time. For real.
Yeah.
So as a result, you can tap into massive energy. And I do find that cannabis helps with that. I mean, in the entire almost 50 years of daily practice that I've had, I've still probably practiced more hours without cannabis, but it's getting close now after all these years. And I enjoy it very much. And the caution is, don't let it allow you to become lazy with your practice. That's not acceptable.
Right. Yeah. Dee Dussault, who has a chapter in my book, Cannabis and Spirituality, says she doesn't tell her, or she doesn't always have her students work with the cannabis. She wants them to also be having the experiences of the yoga practices without it too. Yeah. And also not to rely on that necessarily. Yeah.
Well, you know, I spent my formative yoga years, certainly the first 12 or 15 or so of them, really developing voluntary controls, you know, temperature regulation, respiration, blood pressure, brainwave activity, and got tested for all of that stuff. And, you know, I'm grateful that I laid down primarily a foundation of yoga, you know, on its own without cannabis. But I do also very much enjoy the fusion. I mean, when I'm traveling, when I'm in places where there is no cannabis, I'm doing my yoga practice without and loving it. But you know, left to my own devices at home, I'm putting the two together.
Nice. Well, speaking of combining cannabis with things, have you worked much with combining cannabis with the other so-called major psychedelics? And if so, or not, even if you haven't, do you have a take on that one?
Well, in my teen years, when my friends and I were gobbling LSD in the late 60s, we were also smoking cannabis at the same time, most of those journeys. And no question. I mean, not that it was necessary, but we certainly combined both, frequently and often. So even though that was a long time ago, that was a foundation experience for me. And I actually had the occasion about a year ago. I went to see a friend who was dying on the big island of Hawaii. And it was really like the last time he could rally at all before he just went way downhill with his cancer. And so we went around for about a week seeing a lot of people we used to spend time with on the island. And we had occasion to go to an ayahuasca ceremony on the Kona coast with somebody that he knows and trusts, and has a place pretty far out there. And both before and after the ceremony, we smoked. He was in a lot of pain, so we were pretty much doing that all day long anyway while I was with him. And it was very pleasant. I found it. I thought the compatibility was very good. There didn't seem to be anything dissonant about it at all.
Mm-hmm. Terence McKenna said that he after doing one of his heroic doses of mushrooms, about an hour and a half later or so, he would have a couple of puffs of cannabis, and what he said was it both prolonged and synergized the visions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever it is that happens in our, psychoneurobiology with all of these compounds, and also with the plant spirits themselves, which are powerful and incredibly influential, and also with the energy that we can tap into that is both within us and also outside of us. I mean, all kinds of magical things can happen. And, I don't doubt Terence's experiences, not that they're necessarily marker experiences for others, but it's certainly entertaining to hear what happened to him.
Yeah, indeed.
So I've got another question in regards to moving away from cannabis and ayahuasca necessarily, because you're the medicine hunter. You've traveled all over the world. You've seen all sorts of and experienced so many different plant medicines. Is there any medicines that are maybe not mainstream that are flying under the radar that you have found to be really powerful in the healing community?
Oh, those are endless. They're legion. I mean, I've been investigating medicinal plants for decades now. Yeah. I mean, you guys are probably well familiar with cat's claw, but cat's claw is a classic example. It's the interior bark of a vine from the Amazon. It's one of the most profound anti-inflammatory medicines on earth. It's actually used in Austria as a chemotherapeutic adjunct in cases of reproductive cancers, and as a primary treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. And it's probably the number one plant medicine, pan-Amazonian plant medicine that is not psychoactive. And it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It can bring you back if you're debilitated. I think that chaga, which is a fungus that grows on birch and oak trees and other trees, that it has become popular over the past few years, but probably not enough. It's one of the great medicines on earth in terms of immune enhancement. There's a kind of a belief in medicine that there is no cure for psoriasis. That's sort of a standard theory, and there are all kinds of very well articulated reasons why that's so, blah, 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 blah. But there was a published study a few years ago, 12 people, all of them had psoriasis, all of them took chaga, all of them got rid of their psoriasis.
Wow. Yeah.
So when you look at what's possible, I mean, I work a lot, for example, with Schizandra berry. Schizandra berry, it's been used for 2,000-3,000 years in Asia as a longevity aid, as a heroic restorer of vitality and sexual function and mental alertness and strength and stamina. It's not so well known. And I've investigated that both in northern China and also, oddly enough, a bicycle ride from where my wife Zoe and I live in Western Massachusetts, where a Chinese agro engineer has 50 acres of certified organic Schizandra. So sometimes the thing that I'm chasing turns out to be in the backyard.
Are you taking Schizandra on any regular basis?
Oh yes. I can't show you. It's too bad. I'm right beside the closet we call the shaman's pharmacy, but hundreds and hundreds of bottles and boxes and preparations of all different kinds. And yeah, I'm liberally taking these things every day. It's part of doing the work that I do, is really employing the medicines, being true to that course of action, and using them. I'm in my 60s, and it's not as easy as it used to be to do the intensive travel that I do. I mean, I've already clocked 120,000 air miles this year, and I'm not done. I have about 30,000 more to go, and I need the stamina, the endurance, the strength, the power, the focus, to be able to move through whatever environments I'm going through in a way that I'm alert. I've got all my wits about me. I'm strong enough for the task. So these herbs are tremendously empowering in that way.
I want that little guidebook from you, Chris.
Yeah. And I got to say, for 60, whatever you are, as you were saying, good job, man.
Thank you.
I was going to say he looks pretty good for 47.
Yeah. But, the reason I asked the question was because I think it's important that I know our conference does talk a lot about psychedelics and things, but there's a whole lot of more to the spirit plant medicine world than just psychedelics. And that's why I wanted to really kind of draw a little bit of attention, because you've got such a wide range of knowledge and information and experience.
Most of the shamans who I met initially in my earliest days of traveling and living in the Amazon were women. Most of them were really sophisticated herbalists. They all knew about ayahuasca. They could make it, but they worked with all other plants, and they were very, very focused on the spirit of those plants and how the spirit gets conveyed through the treatment. And this is the spirit doing this. This isn't me. This is, they were very clear about it. And, I think that the so-called plants of the gods, which of course include the fungi as well, these are within the much, much broader global context of medicinal plants. I mean, obviously the psychedelic plants, if you're talking peyote, San Pedro, ayahuasca, iboga, etc., they are medicines in a huge way, among many thousands of other medicines.
So do you think that perhaps because it's recently broken out into the world, that ayahuasca's status as sort of the rock star is somewhat over emphasized amongst the other medicinal plants?
Well, I mean, I look, ayahuasca is in some ways, in some places in the Amazon, saving plant medicine and shamanism. Because of the popularity of ayahuasca,
right?
25 years ago, young people were not saying, I want to stay and learn to be a shaman with my uncle. They were saying, I want to go to Manaus or Iquitos and be a cab driver and wear Nikes and have a TV and rent an apartment. And now that equation has been turned upside down by
that's great.
popularization of ayahuasca. So you have people saying, gee, I can stay in my village. I can fish because I love to fish. I can play soccer with my friends because that means way more to me than being in a moto in car exhaust. and I can do this whole thing that my mother is happy to teach me, or my uncle is happy to teach me, or my grandmother is happy to teach me. And I've, been sitting in these ceremonies for years anyway, since I was a kid. And then, you get to carry the medicine on, not just the ayahuasca, but the other medicines that most of these people employ. You get to maintain a place in community instead of being much more fragmented. It's I don't want to overly romanticize this, but this is good stuff. This is positive stuff. This isn't crap. This isn't ayahuasca tourism, bullshit. This is a real thing. This is helping to preserve traditions that were falling apart and blowing away in the wind.
This is fantastic. You're such an indispensable resource, Chris. Thank you so. No, really, thanks for sharing all that. It's so great.
Well,
It brings up a related question, because this is going to be something that I think is going to be somewhat front and center at our conference, at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference this year, partly because of Jamie Wheel. And, he has that interview that's been circulating called "Is the Psychedelic Renaissance Doomed?" And he's drawing attention to a lot of the, issues like monetization, commodification, superficial understanding, hedonistic sidetracking and stuff like that with the psychedelics, and kind of sounding the alarm on that. I get the sense that you are, I'm sure you're aware of that, but you seem to have a generally more positive attitude about where this so-called psychedelic renaissance is going. Is that an accurate guess?
I think people are participating in the psychedelic scene, if you will, in all kinds of ways. And yeah, there are probably some hungry freaks, daddy, just out there for another psychedelic notch in their belts. Okay. I mean, we did some of that when I was it's not, I think what I don't want is for psychedelics to wind up in the hands of therapists. I mean, it's great if therapists become trained to work with psychedelics, but it should not be their purview. You honestly, we need to be able to feed the freaks too, and I mean it. The scene, such as it is, if you think about how many people traveled around with the Grateful Dead and tripped their asses off for decades, and mostly peacefully, in huge numbers of thousands and thousands of people in cities all over the United States, clearly this is not an especially problematic bunch of medicines. and so yes, people talk about the psychedelics being used for hedonistic purposes. There's nothing wrong with some hedonism. There's nothing wrong with diving deep into sensual and erotic pleasures, as part of the whole mix of your life and your experience. We need to be careful what we're critical of here.
Right on. Yeah.
We only want sober-minded, thoughtful, caring professionals taking psychedelics. Bullshit, we do. No.
Yep. Yeah.
No.
So you're going to be on the.
It.
Yeah, you're going to be on the, we're having a whole new segment to the conference this year on the Friday afternoon on, how to move these substances forward in the culture. And you're going to be on the psilocybin panel talking about this, just the kind of things you're talking about right now.
I represent the Cognitive Liberty Party.
Right on.
I love free choice.
Yeah. So, do you, obviously this is going to be talked about in that panel. I'm sure the psilocybin is getting a lot of attention. The kind of conventional wisdom within the psychedelic community now is that it's the next one after cannabis that's going to get a lot of legalization. Do you think it's going to be possible to keep it under the auspices of the Cognitive Liberty Party?
I think it's going to be a state-by-state shit show is what I think it will be. Yeah. Look at cannabis. It's clearly a matter of how, they're going to be more freaked out in Kansas than they're going to be, let's say, in any place in Kansas than, let's say, in Austin. All right.
Right.
And so you're going to have people coming up with, no, this should only be administered by psychiatrists in a jail cell. To, yeah, everybody should be able to grow mushrooms and eat them at home. I mean, you're going to have everything.
Right.
We haven't begun to see the folly of this one.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, the cannabis one up in Canada, because it's one law for the whole country. It's not state by state or province by province shit show. One of the big bitches that's happening right now amongst the people that work in that, that have been in it for decades, is that the government gave the majority of the licenses to these massive licensed producers, and now everybody wants to get in on it. Coors has bought like 52% of one of the largest companies, like people that don't give a damn about cannabis at all or understand it in any way whatsoever, and now it looks like there are people positioning themselves to do that with psilocybin as well.
We unquestionably will see that.
Yeah.
I think that with cannabis, I mean, look, I'm an artisanal grower. We're allowed to grow here in Massachusetts, and many of my friends do. Most of my friends do. So we circumvent all of that crap that's going on in the market. I mean, there's even now technology that through yeast fermentation can yield cannabinoids, both THC and CBD, so that it's not even necessary to work with the plant.
Wow.
We haven't begun to see how weird this is going to go, but the advantage we have with cannabis certainly is that we've had a strong artisanal market globally for a long, long time. And people aren't just going to suddenly throw that away. The entire rest of the population that's being sort of sucked into the cannabis vacuum of Coors type products, et cetera. They're not mostly the people who've been in the kind of artisanal market for a long time. So I think that we'll see both going on side by side. And I don't doubt that there'll be some, spooky, creepy entities out there with global tentacles, all over the place, manufacturing, synthetic psilocybin. But I also think that there will remain a bunch of people with, mushroom grow kits in their closets.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to tell stories out of school, but hey, I've been doing some research.
Hands-on research. Yeah.
Exactly. I showed Stephen yesterday. It was that big. But I wanted to say one thing. I love the fact that you're able to grow your artisanal cannabis there in Massachusetts. And in Canada, we're allowed to grow 4 plants. They've given us that permission. And it's really quite interesting because there's a whole bunch of laws and rules around it that still kind of make it illegal almost. But people are still doing it. And what was really interesting, Stephen and I were part of a little, I don't know what that was. We were at, Stephen, that mini conference mastermind group one day on cannabis, and there was a gentleman there.
What were you talking about?
The Merlin one. I can't even remember what it was called.
That was very mini.
Yeah. But it was interesting because we met an interesting guy there who was part of the he's part of the government regulatory board and everything else. And we were having this conversation with him about all these people coming in, big money, big pharma and everything else. And as a government official, he was saying how pissed him and a bunch of other people are within the government about that. And he said the number one way that we can combat that or circumvent it is that everybody grows their own 4.
Right.
And even if you don't, smoke it or consume it or anything else, if you're, the neighbor who loves to garden, grow 4 for your friend. Go grow your 4 so that people aren't relying on this government grass. And it's what you were talking about too, where and Stephen and I know this from experience here in BC, where we're known for some of the best bud in the world, and the government stuff is all substandard. The stuff that you buy legally that they want to kind of eliminate the black market and things. They've really made it stronger for, the connoisseurs who want good bud. And
there are so many people cultivating both indoors and outdoors who are not part of the gigantic licensed system. And I have no reason to believe that's going to go away.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question that's just for me, actually, and the few other people that might be doing what I'm doing, since you know about a lot of these other medicinal plants. A friend turned me on to a year or two ago, Heishuwu, also known as Foti, Chinese one, and I've been taking it. Do you know anything about its efficacy? It's supposed to have I'm just taking it, as a spoonful in the morning, and supposed to have some of the same kind of properties you were talking about with this Schizandra, but I'm wondering if I should switch to Schizandra for a daily dose,
Well, Foti was actually one of my early go-to herbs in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing is making sure that you're getting authentic Foti, but it does have a reputation as being somewhat of a restorer of youth. There is some good science behind it. One of the persistent claims made by people about Foti, which is just obviously untrue, is that it turns gray hair black. It does no such thing.
No, as you can see from my head here.
Even we can tell.
but yeah, it's a good herb. That said, from a comparative standpoint, Schizandra is vastly superior.
Wow.
It just there's this whole class of herbs called the adaptogens, and basically they help you to adapt to all forms of physical and mental stress. And you have, Schizandra, rhodiola, ashwagandha. Ashwagandha, Marc, was the word that bedeviled you in the beginning there. And these are quite powerful herbs. They do imbue you with a lot more strength and energy and stamina. They sharpen mental alertness. They're great companions, by the way, to cannabis. I've long been using these with cannabis, getting all of the benefits and the effects of cannabis, but that enhanced sharpness and alertness and strength that certain of these herbs provide. So if you were doing an either or between Foti and Schizandra, Schizandra would be your go-to herb for sure.
Is it readily available over here?
Should be. In your Chinatown, you got to be able to get Schizandra easily enough.
Well, what I'd like is the Chris Kilham morning recipe, actually. Yeah, like 4 or 5 really good ones.
Yeah, I'm sure Chris can probably give you a whole schedule of things to do on a regular basis to keep you as young and vibrant as he is. So hey, I got a question and a comment in regards to something you said earlier that really struck with me. And part of it, we're talking about the other plant medicines and the people who are carrying on this work. What I've really loved seeing, and especially in my experience in the past couple of years that I've really been deep into the work that we're doing, is the attention that these medicines are bringing back to the indigenous people, and not just in the Amazon, but also here locally, in the US and in Canada. There is this beautiful awakening or reawakening to kind of the history, kind of what's been happening, and also their culture and practices for healing and ceremony and community. And I think it's just like I say, not really a question, but a comment, that it's really kind of bringing that back to the forefront, where we're seeing so many people really acknowledging, recognizing, and learning from the history of the indigenous people, and learning so that they can keep the information moving forward and keep those things happening.
It's a mixed bag. I mean, I think that as you say, I think that there is, among certain sectors of people, there's a greater awareness of indigenous native people, virtually none of whom are living, quote, traditionally, gone, baby, gone. and but I also have to say that what I see, because I'm traveling throughout India and Asia and South America and the South Pacific and all over the globe, indigenous people for the most part are severely on the ropes. It's not a happy scene. It's not a rosy picture. It's not, oh, great, isn't it wonderful that everybody's so much more conscious about Native people. I mean, I appreciate any enhanced consciousness of what has happened to indigenous people as a result of colonialization of entire continents, but they're screwed. And if you look at what's happening, for example, in the Brazilian Amazon with, many thousands of people just being burned off their land with nothing left to go back to.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yes, it's wonderful that in British Columbia, there's a greater awareness of, indigenous tradition. And I think everything should be done to support and promote that and to maintain, appreciation for that. But it's not a rosy picture out there globally.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's you always have that interesting, unusual perspective because of your direct experience. I would just like to put in a word for something that's going to happen at the conference in that regard. The local Santo Daime church group are supporting a tribe in the Brazilian Amazon known as the Yawanawa. And so there's going to be some fundraising efforts at the conference to support the Yawanawa. And because they've been, a bunch of the people from here and also their Brazilian counterparts have been up there to their village, and they see that they have 1,000-year-old understanding of all the forest medicines and the spirit. You talked about these women, that they understand that's the spirit of the medicine that brings a lot of the healing in. Yeah, so there's a lot of understanding of that. Maybe just on that same theme, there's a really good question, Marc, I think, to your issue. On that theme, I saw an article by, of all people, Noam Chomsky online a couple of years ago. There's nothing content-wise like I'd ever seen from him before. Usually he's cutting the legs off, corrupt, powers that run the world, right? Yeah. Right. But this one was, I don't know how he got into this, but he said that he'd been in touch with a bunch of, tribal indigenous people from various parts of the world who are now starting to recognize and empower themselves in the understanding that they, what threads remain of their traditional connection to, spirit and planet, so to speak, is essential for humanity at this point. And they're starting to connect with each other and be empowered by that. Do you have any sense of that or take on that?
I think there have been and will continue to be many intertribal gatherings, which people speak about this. And also, gatherings of different indigenous groups. I mean, I have been to a couple of large and one immensely large gatherings of Shipibo people in Peru. And, make a point of promoting any and all aspects of traditional culture. While, they all have cell phones, they're all watching TV, they're all wearing sneakers. I mean, it's a different world, they're wearing blue jeans and button-down shirts and stuff. But, why not? I mean, our romantic idea of indigenous people is, just a romantic idea. But I do think that there is, I've seen over the many years, many more intertribal gatherings and mutual, shows of mutual support between tribes. And I think this is very important because tribal people have been whittled down to such tiny, tiny numbers and are still being shot dead in the forests and mountains and fields, of the world today, even as we're speaking right now. So, anything they can do to maintain some kind of native cohesion, I think is in their best interests.
Do you put any truck in this, what some people would call a woo-woo idea of the joining of the condor and the eagle for the arising of the vision of a healing planet?
Well, You know, I think that we have many parallel tracks of human activity going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are people, say, who would aggregate at a place like spirit plant medicine, who are actualizing that prophecy, and the people that we're connected to and the people that they're connected to. And at the same time, you have a whole other track, which is also fulfilling the timing of the prophecy of devastation, of destruction, of evil, of depravity, of complete sociopathic insanity. You know, these are, that whole thing that's going on is one of the precipitating factors of fulfilling the prophecy. You know, when the four corners are being destroyed by mining, then blah blah blah. You know, which we're doing. So yeah, I do. You know, I think that these prophecies, I believe, in many instances, are real, and the question is, what do we do about that to reinforce the forces of good to the extent that we can, and to thwart, you know, the basically the evil bastards out there to the best extent that we can too.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you're familiar with Chris Bache's work now too, right? From last year's conference, and he'll be back again. And you know, he has this whole notion that he was taught by the intelligence of the universe, or whatever you want to call them, that we're heading toward a great awakening, but that it inevitably has to be preceded by what he calls a great death of you know, of the insane ways that the world is, you know, being run now. Yeah. One thing they didn't
he had a
do
beautiful way of describing that. Remember, Stephen, he talked about, you know, the birth of that was like, you know, the long gestation to the contraction to the all of a sudden the birth.
The shit show leading up to the actual moment of birth. Yeah,
exactly. He says, and the, you know, the pain and everything else that happens within that. It was just a really great metaphor the way he explained it.
The tough thing, I just have to say, and I don't want to dwell on it, is that in my travels around the world, while I do meet some very, very wonderful people and people I admire and respect, and who are doing good work, I am mostly seeing destruction out there. I'm mostly seeing severe, grave environmental destruction, cultural destruction, you know, savage depletion of natural resources and natural places. So, you know, I think that if there is going to be some sort of, you know, splendid bring us into the light awakening, it better happen pretty damn quick.
Well, yeah. Okay, I think that, you know, people like Chris Bache and others would say that they're not being they're not under emphasizing at all the horror show that is likely to happen, that would have to precede that. It's like things will have to get so bad that there will be absolutely no question that there is no alternative other than some sort of consciousness change about the way things that happen on this planet. But you know, I think the implication is this could last decades or even centuries before anything like that ever happens. You know.
Oh no, this is not a future thing. This is not a
no,
future.
I mean the shit show could last for decades or longer before you know, there's a, as Leonard Cohen might have put it, a big enough crack for the light to get in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Chris, with everything that you've seen and experienced, what would you suggest, or what would your thoughts be on what we can do as individuals and as community in order to, you know, help?
Well,
you know,
I think
that end the destruction and things.
I think that in our daily lives we can, you know, be positive influences in terms of, you know, the activities that we choose to engage in, the products that we choose to buy. I mean, we all have to buy stuff. You know, we got to buy groceries, we got to buy clothing, we got to buy stuff. You know, we got to buy toothpaste. And it can either be some toxic crap toothpaste from some nasty lab in Cleveland, or no offense to Cleveland, you know, or it can be like some sort of organic toothpaste, you know, from whatever, from Weleda or something that, you know, we have all these choices.
Yes.
And we can make positive choices and that helps. But I also believe that more than anything else, if we can be ambassadors of goodwill, one of the reasons that, and it may be the best reason that I'm successful in my medicine hunting work all over the world, is that I truly am an ambassador of goodwill. I'm not the expert showing up. I'm open-minded. I'm grateful to be there. I'm, thrilled at the hospitality that's extended to me. I want to carry as much goodness as possible to people I'm meeting, to, share that vibe and to, be a bridge between cultures. And I think if we can do that in circumstances large and small, I mean, don't ignore the damn cashier. Don't ignore the waiter or the waitress. Talk with everybody. Talk with the cab driver. Where do you come from? Ethiopia. Really? How long you been here? You were an engineer before? I mean, the more connectivity we can have, and I don't mean this kind of connectivity. The more connectivity we can have, I think that is a huge dose of planetary love medicine.
Beautiful.
And that's what we love about the conference, right, Stephen?
Well, that's the consciousness transformation, which seems to be at the root of all this. Changing behaviors in the material world, absolutely essential. But the behaviors ultimately are sourced from the consciousness awakening, right? The love button, as it were. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The Beatles.
Right. And sometimes when you meet people whose love is so impervious that there are no holes in it. When I met Lama Thubten Yeshe a bunch of decades ago, this guy, I just have to say, he was just plain happy. Okay. He was just full of love, and that's the only thing he was about. And yes, he could articulate very intelligent, complex teachings and all of that. But when he got right down to it, he was an imperturbable bundle of love. And so, you get around the guy and you go, wow, this is great. This is the best stuff. If we can do that, in ways large and small. And look, I'm not always on my game. I'm not always Mr. Oh, I'm so cosmic loving. I'm not. Okay. When I remember to be, then I am. But I think that's, to answer your question, Marc, I think that's one of the absolute most important things we can possibly do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well put. Beautifully put, actually, Chris. Yeah. And in fact, I think a lot of people kind of lose track of the fact that ultimately, the awakening is a state of joy and love, right? My old Buddhist teacher called it primordial smile.
Yeah.
Right. I once was with a bunch of Kundalini yogis, and they had invited the guy who was the head of the American Buddhist order to speak to them. And this guy was magnificent. He was really radiant and happy and content. And they were asking him all these provocative questions, like, when you meditate, does the fiery Kundalini surge up your spine and you see a blue pearl at your third eye? And you go, no, that never happens to me. They kept trying all these things. Do you feel the sensation of fire in your sahasrara? No. They go on, and he'd go, no. But when you would look at this guy, he was so imperturbably happy and so and so completely present, and everybody asking him questions was aggressive and stupid. And I thought, what this guy is doing right here, right now, is the thing to pay attention to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Do you remember did you ever see the little book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind?
Yes, of course.
Well, in the introduction by the guy that put the book together, he said he was sitting with him and his wife, and he said to Suzuki Roshi, "Well, you never really talk about Satori. Why is that?" And his wife piped up and said that because he's never had it.
Right.
My old Buddhist teacher called it ordinary magic, was what Trungpa Rinpoche called it.
Right.
That whole, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, get your students to do it. Do it.
You chop wood, you carry the water. Make me some tea.
What's that? I didn't hear that last bit.
You chop wood, you carry water. Make me some tea.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, hey guys. Well, we've been an hour, Chris. We don't want to take too much more of your time, even though I'm sure we could, go for hours picking your brain and have you sharing more, wisdom and stories. But I want to thank you for taking the time of your day today to join us to share some of your, stories, your information, insights. And we look forward to having you on the conference again this year with this psychedelic sermon. I think is going to become a regular thing because we got our 10-year anniversary next year. So, we got to start thinking ahead.
Well, I appreciate both of you, Marc and Stephen, for doing this and for having me on. And yeah, I'm looking forward. I mean, what happens with the talks most of the time is that I kind of come up with an outline of what I'm going to speak about, and then I get up there and say, forget it. Promptly just go, nah.
Yeah,
so
I understand
what will happen, but it always seems to work out. And thanks to you guys for putting on what really is an extraordinary event that I think people shouldn't miss.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, yeah. And I also want to acknowledge and thank you and your wife, Zoe Helene, as well. Big support of the conference. I think this is, Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the fourth year that you've been here. And I just want to thank and acknowledge and even let everybody out there know that you've been a big supporter. Zoe Helene and her Cosmic Sisters are a big part of the conference this year.
Big part.
We didn't even get into that part of the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But I just want to thank and honor that work that you guys are doing and bringing, psychedelic feminism in. And I saw Zoe's cover on the magazine you were talking about. It was a great title as well. It was like, so it's just the work you guys are doing is fantastic.
And I want to say that Zoe has been teasing me for years about her desire to speak, but she always kind of says, well, maybe I'm not quite ready yet. And then this year she finally said, I think I'm ready. So Zoe's going to be, she's got Chris has got an encyclopedia of knowledge in that brain of his too. But Zoe also has quite a bit of knowledge about this whole world and articulates it extremely well.
Yeah, I think for her, it's really a matter of comfort. I mean, I've always been at great ease in front of a group speaking, and for her, it's not necessarily so. So that's the big thing. But in terms of knowing her topic and doing remarkable work, she's doing great stuff. And trust me when I tell you, I hear every detail.
I'm sure you do. I have long conversations with her myself. Yeah.
Right.
I've had a few myself also. Yeah. No, it's great. I'm just totally excited to reconnecting with you guys and sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your passion, your love, your joy, and Chris, your humor, because you're a funny guy too. So I always appreciate that because I love to laugh. So you make me laugh every time you speak in a good way, so
bless you guys. We will be there, fully dressed for dinner for Spirit Plant Medicine, and we'll be thrilled to be happy thrilled to be part of the tribe, which is really one of the great experiences that we have every year.
Wonderful, yeah. Hey, my final important question is, how do you spell Schizandra?
Schizandra is Schizandra.
Wait, a little
Schizandra. Sometimes you'll see it spelled Schiz, but either one will get you there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time, Chris.
Guys.
Stephen, thank you. We'll see you in 4 weeks from today. Exactly. Awesome. Have a great weekend. Say hi to Zoe for us.
Cheers.
All right. Take care.
Cheers.